Welcome back, everybody. This is your co-host, Rusty Ham of Catching You. Here is part two with Fundamental Fast Pitch Podcast. Enjoy.
Rusty, let's get you into the conversation here a little bit. That's a good transition for us. I'm at that stage right now where I've got the little one. I have a 6-year-old daughter. I wouldn't recommend volunteering racing until your limits and your patience threshold. Make sure that's high enough to be around those little ones for an extended period of time. But Rusty, let's jump over into your kind of like hindsight, looking back into that age group and first starting off with Lacey and kind of just the transition for you as a coach and a parent over the years.
Yeah, I first want to say I'm glad that having a perspective like she has at 21 skipped a generation because I was not like that at 21 years old. I was trying to find the nearest bar. And so I appreciate Lace. Great stuff. I love just hearing you talk about your perspective on life and how softball is going. Yeah. So when she was 6, our goal, when I started teaching in 98, I was fortunate enough to have a PE teacher. He was older. He had a lot of wisdom. And the first thing he says, hey, the first thing you need to do is get your daughter into gymnastics for that coordination and just being able to move your body in a productive way. That was the first thing we did. We put her into gymnastics. And then that's one thing I did is I seek help a lot from other teachers, parents. But it was very important to us that they played multiple sports. So I think, Lace, when you're 6, we tried to get you into water polo. We got you into soccer, basketball. We even tried lacrosse. That's when you were in middle school. So we were trying multiple sports. So we had no idea at 6 years old that she was like really interested in softball. She loved the cheers. That was for sure. So she was the one, and we talk about it, I think, in one of our first 2 episodes. The season started, but we didn't have any cheers, right? So she went online and she printed out all these cheers and she brought it to the next practice so that everyone can learn it. And so she was in charge of the cheers, and and since then, she's always, in the dugout. She's always in the corner of the dugout leading the cheers. Even when she had a bad pitching game, she would probably sit on the bench for a split second. But when the team was up, she would, even if she had a bad inning, she would still cheer for her teammates. So that wasn't when we saw her doing that when she was young. We're like, okay, we know that she's competitive. Number one, she's also very supportive, and so we tried to get her into multiple things. So that would be my first advice as 6 years old is this people do what they like. I don't pigeonhole them into one sport. A lot of parents will do that though. They grew up playing baseball, so that's all they're going to do. They're going to put them in baseball. So that would be my only thing. And then once she started getting the fever of, I think it was 7, right? 7, right? I think she was 7 is when we first got her first pitching lessons. And those videos are absolutely, number one, they're adorable, but they're the funniest things on the face of the earth. So I don't know if that's, but when we found that she was interested, she started getting the fever of softball. We were going to do anything. When they fall in love with the sport, they fall in love. We're going to support her. So we figured it out, whether it was pitching lessons, batting lessons. We didn't do batting lessons for a while, but it was mainly pitching lessons when we first started.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I started in gymnastics. Actually, I did baseball. Heather and I both started out in baseball before we transitioned over softball. And then same thing like in junior high, my parents were similar. I played basketball, volleyball, track, tennis. I did pole vault. Like basically if there was a sport going on during the season, like I was in it until I got to high school and I was like, okay, time to zone in, pick one and stick with it. And Heather, you played multiple sports throughout your like youth sports era, right?
Yeah, basketball and volleyball as well.
Yeah.
Mostly just softball though.
Yeah, I didn't
Yeah,
have the height to continue in those two.
and those were when I coached, because I coached school basketball as a head coach for a while. Those were my most successful players, were ones that played football. I played basketball, after basketball, I was 3 sport athletes. So those were the, and they got it, right? They understood. It wasn't just all about basketball and their playing time. They were
Yeah.
just They were there. If they were mainly a football player and they were just there to play basketball, that we talked, Lacey and I talked about being hungry, humble, and smart. The ones that played multiple sports, I view them as being very humble. Because they may not be very good at that one sport, basketball, but they loved it. They were humble about it. They were hungry because they wanted to win, and they were very smart. The multiple sports players were one of my smarter players as well.
So tell me a little bit, Rusty, about as Lacey has developed over the years. That's some good advice for starting out. Talk a little bit so that we can understand as she grew into those teenage years and you talk about being hungry and finding her passion for the game. Do you have any kind of hindsight advice or any sort of like just knowledge that you can share with Heather, again, with a 13-year-old daughter of kind of, do you remember Lacey and at that age and what your style was, what worked for you and some of the things that you guys were working through?
Yeah, when she first started travel ball, I was more supportive. I was like the assistant coach too, because when she first started, Team Mizuno, if you guys have ever heard, but Team Mizuno, Mike Stith broke off from Batbusters at that point and created his own program, Team Mizuno, and then he jumped back in 2 years later. But I was at a supportive role at that point, but when she started like all stars, 8U all stars, and then when she got into travel ball, she's getting a ton of innings. The support had their cut organization she was in, Batbusters. She was very sought out as far as getting a ton of innings on those teams. So I'm not sure. Yeah, just being there support because and to be honest with you, there's a couple episodes in our episodes where I was not supportive. I was because of the organization she was in. I was putting pressure not only on her, but I was putting pressure on myself. Like as a parent, I thought, okay, we're in this big organization. She needs to perform. She needs to be at the top level because she's in this organization. So I was putting pressure on her, unnecessary pressure to perform. So if she did have a bad pitching session in the backyard, I would not be happy about it. I've never pitched a day in my life. I never played softball a day in my life, but here I am, uh, judging her on her performance rather than being supportive. I was not. And then there was a point where I think Heather, she was your age actually, when she came in and said, and she just bawled her head off. She said, "Why are you acting this way, Dad? Like, why won't you talk to me? What is it that I did that made you mad? Honey, I'm not mad at you. You don't hit your spots or you threw the ball over the fence." And she said, "Yeah, but I'm not doing it on purpose." So that was the time where I like, okay, I need to back off, right? As a father. And our relationship got way better after that. I started backing off. I started asking her, like she said earlier, asking her, "Hey, how did that feel?" Or "How did you feel about that?" It was a good transition as a parent. That makes sense. Where I was focused on her and her performance, how it looked on me. If she didn't perform well, how did that look at as me as a father?
Mhm.
So I did a lot of retrospect and backed off at that point.
So how did you find like obviously at the point when she came crying to you, you realized that's way too much, but so you let off. How'd you find when that the line of this is just enough pressure to keep her motivated and working hard and hungry to do better, but not so hard that she's hating life?
Yeah, it was delicate, right? Because you should not be crying. It's-
Yeah.
Number one, that should not be coming. We've talked to a couple other like travel ball coaches, and all of them, they came back crying after practice because of whatever happened in practice. And I'm like, that should not be happening. You should not be crying because of something happening in practice or a bullpen or whatever. But she even described herself. She's very competitive, and we talked about it off camera a couple days ago. But she's super competitive, so it helped me as a father because she would then come to me, "Hey, this didn't work, or this is not working. What do you think?" So she would ask me, right, and then I would always give her my 2 cents. Like I still do, and I think I talked to you guys before. I'll compliment her. Hey, great game. However, you're leaving your changeup over the plate too much, or your rise ball sucks. I'll be really honest with her. I don't hold back as far as what I think. I'm also more encouraging now. I encourage her more. I'm more supportive than I used to be.
No, and I think that's a good bridge. We talk a lot about that on that parent-child, parent-player relationship. In fact, we have a whole Creating Connection series on it where we have an episode specifically talking about that parent relationship. Lacey, I want to get your perspectives because I was in a boat that it took me a while to have that conversation with my dad. And at the point that I finally did it, I had lost my love for the game and it became more like a job. In fact, I think we had a conversation about whenever I was being recruited to Tulsa and the different offers that were on the table. You just talked about it 6 out of 7 days a week. Like softball is like, it's not who you are, but it is definitely a job at this point. They're paying for your education. There's a lot behind the scenes that goes into it. But as a player and as a daughter, like, do you have any recommendations on how or when is the best time to approach your parent about if how they're responding to you or how they're parenting you is not making you feel good, if it's not building you up, if it's not encouraging, if it's taking away that love or that do you have any sort of insight you can share with us there?
mean I had this conversation with him when I was, like, 11 or 12, and for me, necessarily, it wasn't that I was losing love for the game. I just thought what did I think? I thought that he was always mad at me because of the way I performed, and, of course, a lot of children want to impress their parents. They wanna make their parents and I felt like I wasn't doing that because of, like, some of his reactions, and first I went to my mom, and I was like, "Mom, I don't know what's going on," and she's like, "You have to talk to him," and I was like, "Okay, now I have to talk to him," and I would 'cause I've always loved softball. There's only maybe there's a it has to be a really big thing for me to actually lose the love for softball and not make it such a job. Like you mentioned, once you got to college, it did start to feel like a job 6 out of 7 days. But it's all about like we go back to communication. And I know there's some players that are actually like scared to go to their parents and actually communicate. You're making me feel really like bad and I need encouragement from you, not like degradation. And it's hard because as a parent, I feel like it takes a lot for their child to come to you and say, "You're making me feel upset." And once that conversation happens, it there needs to be some sort of reflection, of course, between the parent and the child. I'm I'm grateful that I did it at such a young age and wasn't I'm and that me and my dad have a good relationship where I can come to him and open up to him about it and he'd be understanding and loving and caring about what I have to say. And some kids don't have that relationship. And it's really hard for some girls to do that. And I understand. And I I would just say it might be uncomfortable, but if it's really making you feel like you're losing the love for the game or there's too much pressure on and there's already pressure from your coaches, your teammates, yourself, and now these people that you look up to and that you want proud of you are putting pressure on you. There needs to be some sort of conversation that happens because it can affect your mental health long term. And there are some girls that do just quit softball because it's too much. And that conversation didn't happen because they were so scared of what their parents might say to them. Or like some households are, it can be seen as weak. I mean, I'm a representative at San Jose State for student athlete mental health. And I know it's seen as weak to be seeking help for mental health issues or mental performance issues. And that's a big stigma in the student athlete community. And it is a stigma between a parent and child as well because of sort of how parents have raised kids or some cultures. So it definitely is hard because I'm grateful that I grew up in a household where I with my dad and I could go to my mom about these things, it's hard for me to come from a perspective where I could like there are some households that they might not feel comfortable at all going to their parents. So I don't really know that sort of perspective, and I'm not very understanding of that perspective. So I don't know how much insight I can give on that, but it's definitely I mean, I could say that there is a stigma against being seen as being respectful, like reaching out to your coach and saying, this isn't working, like how we've talked about before. I do know about that. And I just want to say to young girls that it's okay to reach out for help, or even older girls that are in travel ball, like it's okay to talk about how you feel and how softball's making you feel. It should not feel like a job. It's a sport you play. Like you don't softball. I'm going to play softball. Like but you're playing a sport. You're not doing a sport. So that's my
I'm really glad that you mentioned that some kids have a hard time going to their parents, because I absolutely believe that the kids need to speak up for themselves and let their parents know how they're feeling. They obviously parents can't read minds. We can read our kids pretty good usually, but we can't read your mind. But I think that the onus is definitely on the parent to be receptive to those conversations and know that you need to be reading your kids all the time. When there's something a little bit off, when there's something just bothering your kid, you need to dig a little bit deeper, help them feel comfortable in coming to you and having those conversations, because above all else, above all the softball, what's most important is your relationship with your kid. I know growing up, I remember seeing I don't know, so many teammates and and players that I played against that, man, they just resented their dad, their mom so much because they were so hard on them. And they could tell them, I just want to take a break, or maybe just be nice to me, or stop yelling from the stands, or just all of those things. And it's really easy as a parent to lose sight. Like you mentioned, Rusty, you feel the pressure on yourself because it shouldn't, but the way your kid performs feels like it reflects on you. So it can be very easy to get caught up in it and put too much pressure on your kids. So absolutely, parents out there, it's your job, it's your duty to always be tuned in to the way that, the little things that your kid might be giving off, to ask those deep questions and get under there and see how they're doing, and really get that real honest feedback from them and make them feel comfortable to have those conversations with you. It's just so huge.
Yeah, we were fortunate to have good car rides home, right? I gave her space on the ride home, half hour, because like I told you earlier, a lot of our games were an hour and a half away. After a game, I would give her space for about, and I gave her space. And then when she wanted to talk, she talked. And then she would say, "Hey, what did you think of the game?" And then we had a good conversation. Let me ask you this, Heather. What kind of advice would you give a parent who is like that, who is super hard on their kid all the time, who is just constantly just riding them and then, because we don't know what goes on in the car a lot on the ride home. We assume sometimes the way they act at the field, that it's like not a good time, right? And you have maybe split parents, right? Maybe there's a divorce. So there's two different car rides, right? So what kind of advice would you give parents that are like that are maybe not so nice in the car, just
Right.
laying into them after a bad game or something?
And that car ride home, it's something that I've had to learn how to do better on. It's always come from a good place of trying to help my daughter maybe see some of the things she can improve on, or even talk about the things she really did well. But she's just not the type. She doesn't want to talk about it. She needs to process it herself. And then later on, if it's something that's bothering her, she'll come to me. But it took me a really long time to figure that out, and to be able to just let that car ride home just be a car ride. We don't need to talk about the game. We don't need to talk about practice. I do still make a habit of, if it's leaving a game, I always tell her that I had fun watching her, or she played well, or she put off great effort, or whatever. Give her some sort of compliment. Tell her we had a good time. And then if it's leaving practice, I always ask her how practice went, or if there's anything she wants to talk about. And usually it's no. Sometimes it's yes. And then she has plenty to offload off her chest. But it's been an adjustment. But I would absolutely say that since I have made a concerted effort to let her drive that conversation, our relationship has gotten better, just overall. She's the type that when I ask her questions, even when I praise her too much, she feels pressured by it. so she doesn't react well to it. I'll circle back at a later date, give her a day, or at the end of the day, maybe circle back and tell her if I thought she played really well or she pointed out something really specific that I thought she did well. But I've learned to just back off, let her drive that ride home. And I think I say on our podcast all the time, you have to know your kids, know your players, know your daughter, and know what drives her and what she is going to react best to. So everybody's drive home is going to look a little different, but I think it's pretty safe to say that if most parents need to back off on their drive home. You know your kid, what she can handle, but I would say try scaling it back a little bit. If you're all reflection the whole way home, back it off. Only reflect halfway home. See how things go for a while. Scaling back, probably the way to go.
What I found as the parents, they need to fix it right away. They need to check out 3 times. They need to fix that swing right away, or they had too many walks, so they need to fix what was going on. And it's almost a coach and a parent, right? Give them 24 hours. Give it 24 hours, then you can visit how the game went or whatever like that. What about, speaking of parents and coaches, what about that relationship? Because again, I coached for 30 years. I've had many conversations with parents not at the right time.
Yes.
Can you speak a little bit about the appropriate relationship between coach and parent, and what kind of conversations should they be having rather than what the parent thinks they should have?
You mentioned the 24-hour rule. That's any teams that Jess and I coach, we always have the 24-hour rule. It's just a good way to make sure the emotions of the situation aren't taking over the conversation. When we get too emotional, the conversations that result are generally never positive. At least they don't end that way. So 24-hour rule is always a really good guide to go by. And then as a parent approaching coaches, now that my daughter's a little bit older, I have been encouraging her to go advocate for herself. I'm there to support her. She's come to me a few times about playing time or just don't understand the coaching decisions. And I tell her the same thing every time. You should talk to your coach. You should ask her. She'll be able to answer your questions. And I always support her and tell her if you would like to have a conversation ahead of time, the two of us, so that you can make sure you know what you want to talk about, then you're prepared, or I can go with you. I can support you in that way. Whatever you need from me, I'm here for that. But I need you to take the initiative. As far as when it's time for the parent to get involved, that's going to be case by case. But I would definitely advise encouraging your kid to step up first. We've talked before, if there's ever any kind of safety issue, of course, that's a different story. But
Just to chime in, Heather and I talked a little bit about this, that it's also age appropriate. So we're talking about with her daughter who's 13 and advocating for herself and finding her voice. That's not something that I'm going to go expect of my 6-year-old. So as a parent, knowing when it's good to step in and when to, and how to do that, how to approach those conversations. So coming in, yelling, kicking, screaming, iron fist with these laid out expectations is not the way to go. It's always a 2-sided conversation. Like Heather said, the 24-hour rule to take the emotions out of it, but also asking questions in a way that's respectful of the coach. So as coaches, like, we prefer the parent conversations that are like, hey, what can we be doing at home to give our kids more opportunities? Or what does my child need to work on? Or just, again, like that whole accountability aspect. If it's conversations about, hey, why did you make this coaching decision? Or why isn't my kid batting higher, or strategy or things like that? I'm going to be honest, as a coach, those aren't really conversations that I'm as receptive to, because at the end of the day, like, our motto is that whole trust the process thing. So if you want to have a disagreement or a debate on coaching styles, like, that's a path I tend to not to stay away from.
yeah, and just to piggyback on that, one of the things, I've had a few conversations with my kids coached in the past. Now, it's not something that's unheard of. It happens. Sometimes you just need clarity on what the process is. One of the things I absolutely shy away from is comparing my kid to one of her teammates. I'm not going to a coach and saying, why isn't my kid getting opportunities here? She's done this and this other player has done this. That's not my choice. I'm the coach. I'm the parent. I'm not the coach. I'm not making the decisions on playing time. I can get feedback and just find out what my kid can do to give herself a better chance of getting that playing time or whatever it is that she's looking to get. But I am not going to put the coach into a position where she has to try to defend her coaching decisions on the spot. If that's where conversation leads when I'm trying to understand the process, that's what I'm trying to get at, right? I'm trying to understand why the decision was made to do this rather than that. So I don't need to compare specific players or plays or games or anything like that to understand why these decisions are being made. So I never, ever bring up another player to compare to my player.
Awesome. Yeah, I've had
Yeah.
to hold myself back a couple times. Even through her college career, I've had to hold myself back. I'm like, do you want me to email the AD? And she's like, what are you talking about? you know?
Yeah. And just to add to that, circling back again to the whole like parent player dynamic, Heather, this one's big for me. We've talked about it, but not comparing your kid to their teammates, like in conversations, even if you're trying to be constructive and give them feedback, that, at least for me, that was a big no as young females too. Like we already put all this extra pressure on ourselves. And that just was something that as soon as my dad would try to do that, I would shut down. So just the comparisons and especially like the stats and just, it's not a good avenue.
Awesome. I guess my last question, and we talked about, Lacey and I talked about being humble, being hungry, and being smart. I guess a twofold question. Describe a smart player and then describe a smart parent. And it's not intellectual. I never could say that word, Huntley. It's not being smart like book smart, but just describe a smart player and describe a smart parent if you can.
I'll take smart parent to start it off.
All
I
right.
think just reiterating what we just talked about, a smart
Okay.
parent is going to know when to speak up. They're going to know whether that's to the coach, whether that's how they handle their relationship with their kid. They're going to do the homework to educate themselves on the game. Just, you don't have to know softball in and out to support your kid, but you should probably know the basics so you know how to support her. And then just being supported at the fields and at home. So if you're at the fields, it's never the parents that are yelling at umpires or screaming at this and that. That's not a smart parent. You know when to speak up. Either you're cheering or you're not saying anything at all during games. At home, off of the field, it's always being there to support your daughter, whether it's the softball stuff or the outside of softball stuff, because it's all interrelated, like we've talked about. The smart parent knows when to speak up to coaches, when it's appropriate, how to support your kid to go speak to those coaches. Smart parent, I don't know, to me, more often than not, just keeps their mouth shut, knows when to open it. But and when they do open their mouth, it's something that if you're running your mouth all the time, when you go to approach a coach, you're not going to, the words you say aren't going to hold much meaning. But if you are quiet, you're reflective, you speak up only when there's a reason to speak up, then those words that you speak to the coach, they're going to be taken better. They're going to be more receptive to what you have to say, and the content of what you say is going to be heard better.
Yeah, and I agree. And I also would include being a smart parent at showcases and stuff because there's college coaches watching, right? So
Yes.
you
No,
also
they're recruiting you
are-
too.
yeah, they're recruiting the parents. And you guys touched upon that in the
Yeah.
your connection series is when you guys are running a travel ball team, the coaches out here, some coaches they're recruiting the parents. So if you were a crappy parent, even if your kid was good, they would not take the kid because the
It
parents
just makes the whole experience miserable. It's been the same vein, being able to, I think, more than anything, maybe it may just be because this is where we are with my daughter at the moment, but being able to speak up for yourself and finding your voice, so that whether that's with your coaches or with your teammates, holding each other accountable, just on the field. My daughter's a catcher. I was a catcher. So learning how to have a voice on the field, whether it's calling plays or hyping up your teammates or just letting everyone know how many outs there are. That's something that's learned, and it's one of those intangibles of the game. So smart players have those intangibles, whether it's the softball IQ, whether it's just carrying yourself properly on the field, respecting umpires, all around love of the game, and always being a good teammate, always picking up your teammates.
Oh, I'm done with my quote. I appreciate you guys having us on. It was real cool having this conversation. At least I'm not sure about what you thought, but I thought it was really cool. Heather and Jeff, thank you for having us on. I appreciate it.
Yes, it was a great conversation. Thanks.